You did nothing wrong. You know that. You've replayed the moment 100 times. You checked. You analyzed. You came to the same conclusion every time, and yet somewhere in your chest, guilt is sitting there anyway, heavy, uninvited, completely irrational, and absolutely real. This is one of the strangest things your brain does. It generates guilt without a crime. It manufactures a sense of wrongdoing out of thin air. And if you've ever felt guilty for eating something, for resting too long, for saying no, for someone else's bad mood, for simply existing in a way that took up space, then your brain has done this to you. Probably more times than you can count. But here's what most people never find out. That guilt doesn't come from your conscience. It comes from something much older, much deeper. And understanding where it actually comes from changes everything about how you experience it. Guilt, in its most basic form, is a social emotion. It evolved not to punish you, but to protect your relationships. Researchers have been studying it for decades, and one of the most important frameworks for understanding it comes from June Tangney, a psychologist at George Mason University, who has spent much of her career distinguishing between two feelings that most people confuse: guilt and shame. Guilt, Tangney found, is about behavior. It says, what I did was wrong. Shame, on the other hand, is about identity. It says, I am wrong. And while they feel similar on the surface, they have completely different effects on your psychology. Guilt, when it's functioning the way it was designed to, motivates repair. You feel bad about something you did, and you want to make it right. That's healthy. That's guilt doing its job. But the guilt you feel when you haven't actually done anything wrong, that's a different animal entirely. That's guilt that has been disconnected from behavior and rewired to respond to something else entirely, the perception of other people's discomfort. Your brain is constantly running a background process that most psychologists call social monitoring. It tracks the emotional states of the people around you. It watches for micro-expressions. It reads body language. It notices when someone goes quiet. And when it detects something off, a tense silence, a change in someone's face, a shift in the room's energy, it sends up a signal. And for many people, that signal gets translated immediately into guilt. Not because they did something, but because their nervous system has learned to associate other people's pain with their own responsibility. This is not random. It's learned. And the learning usually starts very early. Developmental psychologist Martin Hoffman, who spent decades studying moral development in children, found that children begin to experience guilt as early as age 2. But Hoffman made a crucial distinction. He noticed that children raised in environments where a caregiver frequently expressed distress, where a parent's sadness, frustration, or anxiety was highly visible, developed something he called empathy-based guilt. These children didn't just feel bad when they caused harm. They felt bad whenever someone near them was in pain, regardless of cause. Their nervous systems had been conditioned to link proximity to suffering with personal culpability. In other words, someone else feels bad, therefore I must have done something. This pattern doesn't stay in childhood, it follows you. In adulthood, it shows up in all kinds of situations that have nothing to do with actual wrongdoing. You cancel plans because you're exhausted and spend the rest of the day feeling guilty for choosing yourself. Someone at work is in a bad mood and you spend hours wondering what you did wrong. You eat a meal that you enjoyed and feel guilty before you've even finished it. You take a break, sit still for 10 minutes, and feel as though you're failing at something. None of these involve harm. None of them involve a victim. And yet the guilt arrives exactly on schedule. Psychologist Brené Brown, whose research at the University of Houston focused heavily on shame and vulnerability, identified a particular pattern she called the never enough trap. Her interviews with thousands of people revealed a consistent thread. Many people feel guilty not because of what they've done, but because of what they feel they haven't done enough of. They haven't worked enough, rested enough, loved their family enough, called their parents enough, been present enough. The guilt here isn't reactive, it's anticipatory, it's chronic, and it has almost no relationship to actual behavior. It's driven entirely by a gap between what you are doing and what you believe you should be doing. And that belief system was built mostly by other people. This is where the brain science gets interesting. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, studying the neurological basis of social emotion, found that guilt activates regions of the prefrontal cortex associated with mentalizing, the process of imagining what other people are thinking and feeling. When you feel guilty, your brain is running simulations of how someone else might be experiencing you. It's modeling their perspective. And here's the critical part. The brain runs those simulations whether or not you've actually done anything wrong. The guilt response doesn't require a crime. It requires only the mental projection of your behavior through someone else's eyes and the conclusion that they might be hurt by it. This is why you can feel guilty about things you haven't even done yet. Why you can feel guilty in advance, before a conversation has happened, before a decision has been made, before a single person has reacted. Your brain modeled the scenario, concluded that someone might be disappointed, and fired off the guilt signal to preempt the social cost. Your nervous system is trying to protect you. But what it's protecting you from isn't harm you've caused, it's disapproval you might receive. And disapproval, for a social species, is genuinely threatening. That's not an overreaction. For most of human evolutionary history, being rejected from your group was a survival risk. Social exclusion meant fewer resources, less protection, greater vulnerability. Your brain treats the threat of other people's negative judgment with the same seriousness that it treats physical danger, so guilt, even irrational guilt, is your brain's way of keeping you in line with what it believes the social environment requires from you. The problem is that the social environment your brain learned from was very small. It was a family, a classroom, a neighborhood, and the rules of that small environment got encoded as the rules of the world. If a parent withdrew emotionally when you didn't perform, if approval was conditional on behavior, if the household atmosphere was shaped heavily by one person's moods, if saying no was treated as selfishness, if rest was treated as laziness, if needing things was treated as a burden, then your brain learned to preemptively generate guilt whenever any of those behaviors appeared, even when you're an adult, surrounded by entirely different people who are not your parents and who are not actually disappointed in you. Psychologist John Bradshaw, who wrote extensively on what he called toxic guilt, drew a sharp distinction between healthy guilt and what he described as free-floating guilt, a diffuse, chronic sense of wrongdoing with no identifiable source. He argued that many adults are walking around with guilt that doesn't belong to them. Guilt that was transferred to them in childhood through shame-based parenting, religious conditioning, or cultural messaging that equated their worth with their productivity, their behavior with their lovability, and because that guilt never had a specific cause, it also has no resolution. You can't apologize your way out of it. You can't fix it by working harder. You can't earn your way back to neutral. Because there was never a crime. There was only a system that taught your nervous system to stay uncomfortable. What makes this especially hard to untangle is that the guilt feels completely convincing. That's one of the most important things to understand about how the brain processes emotion. It doesn't label feelings as rational or irrational before you experience them. It just fires the signal. And your conscious mind receives the signal and then builds a case for it, a story, a reason. You feel guilty, and then your mind goes looking for what you did wrong. And it will usually find something. Because if you look hard enough, there's always something. You said the wrong word. You forgot to respond to a message? You should have tried harder. You weren't enough. The guilt came first. The reason came second. And you assumed it was the other way around. This is what researchers call emotional reasoning, the tendency to treat the presence of a feeling as evidence that its premise is true. You feel guilty, therefore, you must have done something guilty. But feelings aren't facts, they're signals. And a signal that has been misfiring for years because of how it was wired in a very specific environment is not evidence of anything you've actually done. Neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett, whose research on the construction of emotion has reshaped how scientists think about the way feelings are made, argues that emotions are not objective readouts of what's happening in the world. They are predictions. Your brain is constantly generating models of what's happening and what it means based on past experience. When your brain generates guilt, it's drawing on every previous context in which guilt was appropriate and applying the pattern to the current moment, whether or not it fits. It's completing a pattern, it's not reading reality. And that means the guilt you feel, even when it's completely convincing, is your brain predicting that this situation is like those old situations. Not that it actually is. So what does that mean for you? Right now. In the moments when the guilt lands and there's nothing to point to, no victim, no actual harm, just that heavy familiar feeling in your chest, it means you don't have to solve it. You don't have to trace it to a specific wrongdoing. You don't have to fix it by doing more, apologizing louder, shrinking further, or agreeing faster. The guilt is real as a sensation, but it is not real as information about what you've done. What it is real as is information about how your nervous system was trained, about what environments you learned to survive in, about which responses your brain encoded as necessary for safety. And that's not your fault either. You did nothing wrong, you know that. You've replayed the moment 100 times, and this time, for possibly the first time, there is a reason to believe yourself.